This is Brian Corbin. I'm the Executive Vice President for Member Services at Catholic Charities USA, and I'm joined here with Scott Hurd, who's our Vice President for Leadership Development and Catholic Identity, and Father Reagan Schreiber, who's our Special Assistant to the President, and is the Professor of Social Work at the University of Tennessee, and we're really glad to have him as one of our part-time workers here at Catholic Charities USA doing full-time work. We're glad to have him. Before we start, we can just take a moment to put ourselves in the presence of God during this Lenten time. And today in the readings we hear for our liturgy today is that the fasting that God wants is one of unleashing people from their binds and from feeding the hungry poor and from sheltering people. And we pray to our Lord that we too, as Catholic Charities, continue that ministry of the corporal works of mercy that gives people love and compassion with dignity and justice. And we ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So thank you everyone for coming, and I'd like to turn it over to Father Reagan, and Scott and I will intervene as conversation continues, and we're going to open it up and have people ask questions and give comments also. Father Reagan, if you could lead us through this, please.
Thanks a lot, Brian, and thanks to all of you for attending. So here we go. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about the Code of Ethics, and just to let you know that this is going to be something that will be a resource that will be available to our agencies, this PowerPoint presentation that we're giving right now. So as you can see on this first slide right here, and actually the next slide as well, there are a selection of questions that you could begin a training with. Say if you were to do this with your staff at your agency, you could start off by just having some of these questions and have maybe people do group discussions or whatever. And this will be available to you that you can utilize. So that's we won't do that on the webinar right now, but just it's available for you there. So let's look a little bit about where are we and how did we get here. So there was an original code that was put forth in 1983, and basically it had 13 just very, very basic principles and was revised again in 1986, and it was just very basic thoughts that were provided, and those were the guiding ethical code for a long time until 2007. A survey was done and requested a lot of information from agencies about what they wanted from a code of ethics, and we revised it, and it became very an extensive code that covered a lot of things about the behavior that we work with and our clients, governance issues, Catholic identity issues, partnership issues. A lot of things were addressed specifically in that code. Now we've kind of taken a new approach to the Code of Ethics for this newest revision, and basically partnered with, I guess we could say partnered with Charities Internationalis to utilize the code that they have written and then bring it to become more appropriate for our United States environment. So we have this Code of Ethics that was put together by Charities Internationalis in 2014, and we have made it our code. And we're excited about that because it provides a greater connection to the worldwide church, and we are assured of its grounding in the Catholic social doctrine. So some of the ethical standards that are here really are completely laid out and completely easily draw a line to some of the doctrine of our Catholic social thought. Also, just to let you know that Charities Internationalis, which is kind of a worldwide, or it's a global organization of 165 Catholic relief organizations reaching out to 200 different countries and territories across the world. And many of them have adopted this code. And so we are in solidarity with all of these organizations in this adoption of this code. So let's talk about something that's really important in relationship to any sort of ethical considerations in our social welfare response to the needs that people have across our country and in the different agencies that you serve and that we serve through Catholic Charities. Many of our employees have their own professional code, whether it's anything from accounting to counseling to addiction work to social work. We all have our own individual codes, and this is important that we realize that we support the work of ethical practice of all these different disciplines. And so we just want to say that the Code of Ethics of Catholic Charities USA supports and fills in and embraces these different individual codes. So say, for instance, the National Association of Social Workers Code talks about self-determination of the clients. That's an important factor for the Code of Ethics and Social Workers. We hope that self-determination for clients can be connected back to one of the ethical standards that I'm going to talk about in just a second, which is dignity and worth of the human person. that we believe that each individual is autonomous and makes their own moral choices and all those types of things. And so we believe in that dignity of the worth of the person, and we can connect that to the concept of self-determination for clients. So just as an example there, just to say how important these individual professional codes and the following of these codes is significant. Okay, now the use of this code, basically, as I was just sort of talking about these different codes from the APA or the addiction counselors or even the Association of Fundraising Professionals, those often guide individual behavior. So say I'm an individual social worker, I am guided in myself, my own work that I do. The code of ethics that we have for Catholic Charities is a little bit different. It's an ethical code that's organizational. So we think about, in an organizational code, we think about how we as a unit work and support the work of the services that we provide. So the organizational code is all about protecting the service recipients. We may call them clients, patients, we may call them just persons served, whatever the word is that we use, guests or residents. That our whole thing here is to protect the service recipients, to make sure that they are safe, that they're protected from any sort of behavior that might be unethical or inappropriate from the staff or board or volunteer. So that's really important for us to realize, that our organizations want to protect those that receive services from our agencies. We also want to protect the reputation of our providers, of us as providers, that we want to make sure that everyone in town knows that we practice ethically and that we respect the individual person and all those types of things. That's an important element for a use of a code of ethics. Another important element that's key to us is the protection or the articulation of our Catholic identity. We're unique in that we're faith-based, but then even more unique within the faith-based environment, we're Catholic. And that's an important element for us, because we are Catholic Charities. That's our thing in our name. That's what we are. And so it's important for us to really recognize that identity, and that unites us in a special way. And that our ethical behavior is not an addendum to our Catholic identity, but is integral to our Catholic identity. Also, that this code will clarify certain values and principles that are going to be guiding for us, that are going to be real marks for us in our approaches to responses to need in our communities, that these values and principles are going to be really important to guide us in our work. Also, we really want to enhance an awareness of the integrity of our providers. That here in this code, we're going to lay out certain things. We're going to lay out a preferential election for the poor, for instance, or we're going to lay out this concern for the dignity of every person, that we say that we are what we say we are. That in our work, our providers and all those that work as a part of Catholic Charities support all of those values. Whether you're working in the kitchen and preparing meals, whether you're the CEO of the organization, that we all live in that integrity, that we're consistent with the work, the things that are stated in this code. And then on the last thing we need to think about a little bit, and this is kind of a necessary thing for all of us, is to think about risk management and reducing risk, or reducing exposure to things that might bring about a questionable might bring about questions about some of the behavior that's being done. We want to make sure that we are managing that risk and that we're guiding people's behavior to make sure that it's within boundaries that are appropriate for clients that we're working with. So that's the uniqueness of an organizational code, and some of the things, that factors that we wanted to highlight in relationship to the concept of an organizational code versus a code that guides my individual behavior as a professional. So we're laying this code out to you all, to our entire network, that you can adopt for your own organization. Now, here in September of 2018, at the board meeting of the Catholic Charities USA board, this code of ethics was adopted by our organization, Catholic Charities USA. Our office here adopted this as an ethical guide for the work that we're doing here in our office. And so we would like to encourage each individual agency to adopt or adapt this code for your own use. So some of you may have your own particular uses. Maybe you might see something that's really important that needs to be included in this code that you don't see included, but it's important for your individual work. That's something that's going to be important for you to adapt. You can adapt that in the way that you see suitable. You might want to engage your board of directors. You want to engage senior staff. You might want to engage all kinds of staff into looking at this and understanding what the Code of Ethics is requesting of us as employees of the Catholic Charities Agency. please let know that Brian and Scott and I, and as well as Gene Beal, who's been on this committee as well, many of you may know, that we are available anytime to provide some support services. We have a lot of other resources that are other ethical standards, other ethical things, other things to discuss, other tools for training that we will be glad to share with you. So please just don't hesitate to contact us. So all that's really important to remember. And then you can develop a process for you to kind of go through who's going to look at this and have a touch on it so that you can be able to adapt it or adopt it for your own organization, and then provide trainings for it in your agency. Okay. Something that's important to think about is how do we apply this to our organization? Well, basically, this is guiding and accountability. That, hey, look, we respect the dignity and worth of every single person, so therefore we aren't rude or curt to our clients. That's an important thing to think about. It's guided by this code, it's guided by this, and if we adopt that as part of our policy, then wow, we can hold employees and staff and volunteers to this high standard. Basically, we know that all our organizational operations will be aligned with the values and principles that are delineated here. So that means in the work that we're doing as far as financial work, the work that we're doing in partnership and contracts with other organizations, that we're following these values and these principles and how significant that is. Also, again, the idea of looking with partners, to be aware of the partners that we're dealing with. Are the partners that we're engaging with, would they be willing to sign on to any of these values and principles that we are setting forth as that we want to commit to? We want to make sure that other organizations that we might partner with would be on the same page with us on these values and principles. Also, we want to make sure that our mission is something that this code of ethics is something that when we hire new employees, that they understand clearly what we're all about. We recognize the dignity of the person. We have a preferential option for the poor. We're all about social justice and how important those concepts are for someone who's being hired on into our new organization hires. So we want to attract mission-aligned employees. That's the way that we would word that. And in the same way that we want to make sure that everybody understands our Catholic identity from reading this document. Okay, a couple of applications about this code before we really start looking at some of the values and principles individually that are here. And so some of the things that we think about is the Catholic Charities, really we want to encourage the observation of the highest standards of those that we serve, those that are engaged with us, those that are stakeholders with us. So we want to make sure that decisions are made in terms of the client, staff, and the public interest. So that's a big important thing when we think about these standards and these values that we're putting forth here, that they're important, that we're considering that the client is senior in our way of focusing our services and the way that we care for people. But we want to do so with an eye on the client and their needs and their stuff, but also the importance of staff and other public entities to assure that their safety, all those types of things are cared for. We also want to make sure that board members are always aware of the values and principles of their own leadership within the work that we're doing. And again, rooted in the Catholic identity. So that's board. Then to think about how our employees can think about this code of ethics and how they can use it. Maybe they can, maybe if we put it up around the place or hit and make it available for every single employee. Maybe if we have staff days, we could have a staff day that really focuses on this code of ethics. Maybe the use of case studies, the use of open discussion, the use of all kinds of methods. Maybe you could use even this very PowerPoint as a way to kind of share this with the rest of your staff. And to show that all of us are grounded in the Catholic identity, we're grounded in a desire to gain the public's trust, we're grounded in a desire to serve the clients to the best of our ability. Another group that's important for us to kind of reach out to in an ethical, inclusion here is it can be a great tool for the volunteers to be able to realize their work and the work that they do has an ethical grounding as well. We want to do everything that we can to form these volunteers in a more ethical manner or more responsible manner. So these are important things to think about as well. That the volunteer program respects the volunteers and in guidelines within the guidelines of this code of ethics. Okay, now something that we were looking at, something that might be a neat or interesting sort of tool to use or exercise to use is that we get audited financially every year, and we get monitored and audited by state contracts and federal contracts to make sure that we're compliant with them. Why not do some sort of an ethics audit to make sure that we're following the code of ethics that's laid out here? Make sure are the individual people following their ethical standards? Are the principles and values that are laid out here being followed and respected? Are they being discussed in staff meetings? Are they being addressed at all levels of the organization? And I feel like that it would be really, we have discussed this pretty extensively in different ways that an ethics audit could be done. And so this is something that your agency could come up with on your own, or something that maybe we here at the national office could help you with. Also, I believe that the deal about the process of engaging in an ethics audit might be really helpful in just kind of looking at things you've never even thought of as far as ethical standards and how important that is. That also might bring about some greater engagement of other elements of the organization to get them on the same page of an ethical ethics discussion anyway. Another thing to think about as far as an ethics audit would be, has the code of ethics been adopted by the organization? Are the values shared in a meaningful way? Like, do you have staff trainings on it? Do you have conversations on it? Are there individual meetings that are held around it? Things like that. Do the agency's actions align with the values? And all these questions that are articulated here might be really important questions to sort of be looked at, in some sort of an ethics audit. Okay. And then to continue our discussion about ethics audit, I think it's important just to examine all aspects of the organization. What's the culture and climate? Is that within an ethical parameter? What do the policies say? Is our training going on? Maybe does the organization have a whistleblower policy, or even a reporting processes for when there's difficulty going on in the agency? Those might be ways to really enforce the ethical practices that are going on within an organization. And again, we would be very happy to help you with some sort of a tool for helping you do a sort of an ethics audit in your organization. Okay. Again, some more organizational considerations within this ethical code to just think about. That really, this ethical code really should begin with the hiring process or with the interviewing process and that type of stuff, not when you're signed on as an employee. That when we bring on new people, we want to make sure that they really are being hired in compliance with our mission. That the people that we're hiring and that we're screening to come work for us or volunteer for us or be on the boards of our organizations, that we're on the lookout for their ethical practices. Does their life and do they speak to and live out the concepts of justice and respect for others and respect for people who are different and things like that. That's really important. That begins with the hiring process, not just with orientation kind of thing. I feel like also it's important to remember that this is a team effort. It's a team effort that we work together to create the most ethical situation that we can come up with. Also, and there's a third thing there, that the best practice calls for a consistency in ethical decisions that are made. Do we have a process for making a good ethical decisions? And we know here at our office that Brian Corbin is excellent at helping us understand and kind of maybe develop steps for good ethical decision making. He would be a great resource for us, and that maybe it could be a webinar for the road in the future, down the road. Also, that we think about how we're regularly letting people know how important these standards are. Maybe you could start off a staff meeting with, hey, today we're going to focus on this standard, or we're going to focus on this principle. We're going to maybe like build on this value, whatever it is today. We're going to have like a little discussion about it just to start the meeting off. That'd be really cool, a great way to kind of get the meeting going, or whatever that is. And then we think about those that are in leadership. Need to behave ethically in the best way that they can, so that know from the top all the way down and from the bottom all the way up that we're all engaged in the best ethical processes as that we can do. And just to know that all of this is grounded in Jesus Christ and the church that we're a part of. That's really important as well. And then always, that we should always feel comfortable consulting and looking at best responses to ethical dilemmas. And we don't have to know it all ourselves. We can always, when there's ethical things that come up, consultation is key. Consultation with the Chancery, consultation with us here at Catholic Charities USA, consultation with others within your organization when ethical dilemmas arise. That's really, really important to utilize this agency ethics in the broadest way possible. Many times, organizations will set up an ethics committee to kind of discuss maybe there might be a difficult decision that needs to be made about a client or what needs to happen with that client. That can be a really important tool that can be used. Again, we can offer resources and support for something like that. Also, there's lots of relevant documents that are cited and quoted throughout this document, and that's an important thing to know, that we are connected in many ways to the wider church and the teachings of the church. So though we've included a lot of those in here too. So here's a great quote, and it comes from the introduction of the Code of Ethics that is available to everyone. In all their work, Catholic Charities staff, board, and volunteers aspire to embody these values and principles. In so doing, they aim to be active witnesses to Christ's compassion at work in the world. That's a great statement to kind of like just ground us in what's real with us for our work. Now we're going to go through and we're going to talk about some of the values. We have values and we have principles. So I'm prattling on quite a bit here, but hopefully that's okay. We're just going to keep rolling. And if my colleagues here have anything to say, they can join in as well. But
you've done a great job.
Thanks. I was looking for a little support there, a little love. Okay, see, that was very ethical of Scott to encourage me that way. So we have two really components to the Code of Ethics here: the values and the principles. So I'm going to just give an overview of these values and then an overview of the principles, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about them to wrap it up. So first, what is a value? A value really is something that we hold to be important. It's something that we hold to be real and true and valuable, something that we truly hold to be significant and important. And when we think about that, these are the things that we use to make decisions. These are guideposts for us. So if you can imagine yourself kind of going down, maybe even if you're in a lake, if you've ever been on a boat in a lake, and you see those big piles that kind of stick up, or those big buoys that stick up, that's telling us things to avoid. So the values are the things that we hold as important. They're the guideposts that tell us to steer in this direction with our behavior and our relationships and the work that we're engaged in. So we're going to list a couple of really important values here. So the first value that we hold is one that I've referred to a couple of times already, and that's the dignity of the human person. And these points that are sort of laid out here, this grounding point, and those are kind of taken or drawn from the write-up in the Code of Ethics. But we just want to say that our church, our agencies really underscore and wholeheartedly believe is a primary value for us, the dignity of the human life. From conception to death, and how important that is, and the dignity of every person all the way through. So no matter what, no matter where, no matter how, that we believe in this, how important this is. So the work of Catholic Charities lives this out by confronting assaults on the human person, such as poverty, racism, deficits in healthcare and things like that. That's all really important for us to address because we believe in the dignity of the human person. Not just the dignity of the human person isn't something that's just on the side. It's core. It's essential. It's grounded in what we do every day. Okay. Another really important element for us is the concept of justice. This refers to the significance of a just and moral order, about right relationships, how significant that is, and about a society that brings about positive transformation for the people that we are serving. Now, something that we can talk about here, that there's different aspects of justice. There's different kinds of justice. There's social justice, which brings up the idea of the concept of different types of justice, made up of commutative justice, which is all about equity and equality. Contributive justice, which is about all of us participating in the good of the society, contributing what we have of our own means and talents to be able to make the society stronger and better and more full. And distributive justice, which is where the goods of society are distributed according to need rather than wealth or some other factor. So this concept of social justice really is an important element for all of us to think about. So justice being an important value in the work that we do. Another concept that we talk about as far as values is common good. common good really has been used in a lot of different ways. There's not just a single definition, but the common good, with emphasis on common, that we think about the community that we work with. Catholic Charities isn't just for the good of one individual or the good of one person or even the good of one group of people. It's for the good of all of society, the good of the universal communion that we participate in. That's super important to remember, that we are in a community and we are grounded in that community. We are a moral community that lives and works together. Our relationships make us stronger and better. Okay, so we're going to keep going. One of the things that's important here is the concept of integral human development. This is an important value for Charities Internationalis. In fact, there's a whole discussion about this, is looking at all aspects of the human person and how that's transformative for each individual, no matter what. Then we can look to the value of compassion, and you can see the image there. This is a very important image for the work of Catholic Charities, is the work of the Good Samaritan, the image of the Good Samaritan. That we realize that we really have a compassion, that we are, compassion. The word means suffering with. That we are one human family, that when one of us is struggling, all of us are struggling. And that's the concept that is arisen from the Good Samaritan. So say you were doing a training with your staff, this could be a great time to read the Good Samaritan, kind of reflect on it, talk about it, have a discussion around it. What does that look like for you? Now, this is a big one here that I could talk about for a million years, is the concept of preferential option for the poor and oppressed. Now, it sounds kind of funny for us to say that we have a preferential option for one group over another when we've just been talking about how important equality is and every single human person holds dignity and value. But in this way, when we think about it, some people who are more vulnerable we need to have a special eye out or for a special concern for. Let me give you a little example. Say I'm in the front yard with my two nieces. One's 2, one's 6. I'm babysitting both of them, and I love both of them extremely a great deal. Who am I going to watch out for a little bit more than the other? Right, the 2-year-old. I'm going to watch out for the 2-year-old a little bit more than the 6-year-old because the 2-year-old is more vulnerable. She doesn't know what happens when you eat grass. She doesn't know the difference between the driveway and the road that's in your front yard. She doesn't know what happens when you fall out of a tree if you climb it too high. But the 6-year-old may have a greater awareness of that. It's just like that in our society, that we, from an ethical standard, want to have a preferential eye out for those that are economically depressed, those that are having mental illness, those that are having physical difficulties or disabilities. That we want to have a special eye out, make sure our policies, make sure our practices keep a special concern for those people. We love everyone equally and recognize their dignity, just like I love both my nieces. I'm going to watch out for the 2-year-old a little bit more, just like we watch out for those that are vulnerable to difficulty a little bit more than others. Here, respect, of course, is a very important thing. To think about all the different people that come to our door seeking support and seeking help. All different types of religious backgrounds, all different cultures. Just in our refugee programs alone, the many, many different countries that people are coming from, we are called to have respect for whoever's showing up at our door, including their customs and ways of being. Solidarity, that's a significant. I love the image that we've got here for the solidarity, that there's kind of a unity. We may not be in physical proximity to be able to kind of shake each other's hands, but in our mind or in our heart, no matter where, if you're in one state or another state, that we're all in solidarity. We're all in this together. We all want to strive for peace. We all want to strive for the best of the human person's development. All those types of things. And I believe that across the country, even though we're 165 some odd agencies, that we all have a common vision of reducing the impact of the negative impact of poverty. So now here's a great example of another slide that you can use in your group discussion when you're doing a training, that you can utilize these questions. Hey guys, what are some of the values that you really hold on to? What are some values that you might struggle with? Those are important things to think about and great things to engage with when you're talking to others about the use of this code. Okay, so now comes that we've talked about the values, let's talk about principles. So basically, if we look to different church documents, we believe that principles are things that guide the building of a good society and guide the building of a good, worthy human being. And so our social thought really does think of the importance of these principles as also things that guide us in the work that we do. So let's talk about just a couple of principles that are things that we really want to look at primarily. So first of all, partnership. Partnership is really an important thing. A lot of us, of our agencies across the country, are engaged in different partnerships with the United Way, with government, state government, federal government, all these partnerships that we've got, maybe donors that we call partners. This is an important thing to think about. In our work with partners, we really need to be open with them about what we're engaging with. If we're engaging in a contract, that we're loyal to the contract. That's very, very important. So this idea of partnership is discussed in the code pretty clearly. That's important. Okay, the principle of subsidiarity here is given as one of the principles. This is important because we want decisions made at the lowest possible level of authority. So here we want to say that, like, the CEO tomorrow could come in and say, oh, we're restructuring the whole thing. But really, we don't want to do that. We don't advocate that from an ethical standpoint. We would want to have input from everyone that works through the organization. It shouldn't be just the senior person making some kind of arbitrary decision. We want to have everyone involved and have as much autonomy and responsibility placed on each person in the organization to make it a whole, if that makes sense. Okay. Another important significant value is empowerment. And this comes from a more strengths-based approach, that we build on the strengths of our clients. We build respectfully on the strengths of our organizations. We do some things really well, and we are really all about that. So we think about, we want to make sure that our members, our employees, our clients are empowered to be able to make the best decisions for themselves that they possibly can. That they're the ones that can make improvement for their own lives. The services that we offer aren't about creating some sort of dependent relationship. We want to create a relationship with our clients where they feel empowered and strengthened to go out and build their life from here after the help that we've been able to provide in the best way that we can. Independence here is another important principle. That we would never allow ourselves to be used as some kind of an instrument of economic or political interest. Sometimes we need to think about this kind of thing, or just sort of to look at that. Who's out representing us? Who's maybe showing up at our events and things like that? That's really important. And to really think that we are independent-minded and that we'll allow the church to guide our teaching and guide our behavior in many different ways. That's in all ways. That's really important, to think of our independence element there. Okay, and then principles, another to continue, is stewardship and accountability. This happens in a lot of different ways. That when we're collecting the money from donors, we say, hey, so-and-so wanted to donate $100 so that we can buy cookies for our kids at the after-school program. Well, we take that $100 and we go and buy tires for somebody that needs it. That's not being loyal to what that's not good stewardship. It's not good accountability. We use that $100 to buy cookies for the kids in the aftercare program. That's the best example that we can give. That's a good example of how we would use the money that's being offered in the way that it's expected to be offered. Also, just the human person, volunteers that come to work for us. We want to make sure that they're engaged in meaningful things. That's good stewardship. We want to make sure that we're accounting for the work that we do, that we keep a hold of all our receipts and we can produce them when we have a financial audit and that type of stuff. That's really important. Okay. Then another thing that's a principle is, I guess, numerous things really here in this one, is equality, universality, impartiality, and openness to all people. Just this kind of building on the earlier value of the dignity of the human person, that we're all created equal, that we're all here on this level playing field as much as possible as we can make it, that we're all actively participating in making the world a better place. And how do we create a universal openness to that, and how can we respect that? We know that the word Catholic means universal, and that's what we're trying to convey. That's what I love so much about Catholic Charities, is it's the church creating this pluralistic platform for us to provide to the needs of our community and of our world. It's a great thing that we're doing. Another principle is that of protection. So here we are doing everything that we can to make sure that kids are safe, that adults are safe, that even vulnerable adults are safe in every thing that they do. So really, we want to make sure that we're following the USCCB Charter on Protection of Children, and that we're following all the evidence-based practices that we have, like making reports when we know children are being abused, making a legal report when an elder or a vulnerable adult is being violated in some way. So this is really, really important. Even when we think about protection of the rights of our workers, of our staff, to make sure that the policies that we have in our organization protect the workers from having to work overtime unpaid or from having to do things that are unsafe. We really want to do everything that we can to protect our staff and our workers in a way too. Another principle that we hold to be important is the local economies. So whenever possible, it'd be great to use local resources. I know sometimes it's kind of fun to get cheap prices when we are looking at purchasing power, things like that. But there's this great value of having food or having goods that we've got come from the local community, and using those local economies the best way that we can. Another really important principle impacts all of us is that of the care for creation. That we want to make sure that everyone is protected under this. Often we know that many of our clients who are economically struggling end up being the brunt of bad environmental decisions. So we want to be stewards of the creation in which we live to make sure that those that live downstream or those that live in an area that isn't, maybe in a brownfield or something like that, that we want to do all that we can to reduce the negative impact of that. There's lots of talk in our church about that. And it's one of the many primary things that Pope Francis has been talking about. In fact, he spoke about the world needing an ecological conversion. Which is an important kind of concept, and what a moral issue this is, the care of creation. Okay, and coordination is another important principle that our Code of Ethics delineates out here. So we want to make sure that we are able to really maybe address the concept that's not written here specifically, but the idea of collective impact, that we want to work together. Can we use our local parishes? Can we use local religious communities? Can we use civic organizations and other partner organizations to coordinate together? So this is kind of to say, do we need to develop our own food pantry if there's 10 other food pantries on the block that we're already on? No, probably not. But how could we coordinate? Maybe we could do some sort of clothing program where other people could provide a feeding program. Rather than being in competition, we want to be in a more thing where we're building up the community as Catholic Charities. We're a part of a wider service system that's obviously a part of many townships or cities that we live within. So this concept of collective impact can be something that guides our principle of coordination. Advocacy is a big, big part of what we do here. Now you can kind of see there Moses talking to the Pharaoh. Now Moses didn't go to the Pharaoh and say, hey, will you sponsor a golf tournament so I can set my people free? He advocated to them and said, hey, I need you to set these people free. I want to advocate to you. It's so important. Advocacy is such an important part of the work that we do. I know a lot of what we do is about fundraising and about service provision, but if we're not advocating for structures that can set people free, that's important. Martin Luther King also said that we don't want to just be about flinging a coin to the beggar on the side of life's road. We need to restructure the entire road that we're on to make it more equitable so people aren't suffering because of poverty and discrimination and those difficult things. This is what we need to fight for, and fight in a very peaceful way, in a nonviolent way. So we think about here now our 12th principle, which you're probably thinking, wow, there's a lot of principles. So there are many principles, and they're all very important. Here's an important one about learning and staff development. I think sometimes once I was given a job and said, here, unlock the door to my office and said, have at it. That's not the best way to be about staff development. Really, I think we have a role and a responsibility to create training and ongoing development for all of our staff. This also comes along with the concept of grounding in our Catholic identity, to make sure that people understand that why we're doing this and why it's so important in drawing that back. That's really important. And I feel like also, when we talk about development or we talk about the things that we're doing here for learning, is to always evaluate what we're doing. That this is an important element. That we can try services all day long, but if nobody's getting any better from it, if there's no change in the outcome, are we really doing any good? If we're just putting a Band-Aid, but is it to a certain end? And I think it's important to reach out there with some sort of an evaluation. Like, do the clients feel cared for? Do they feel like that there was an important consistency in the treatment that was being provided? show our staff and volunteers that we truly do invest in you and that you are an important element of this work we do. In fact, you are the work that we do. In fact, we wouldn't be here without the staff and the work that we do. Again, to the point of staff care. This is so important. I've seen so many people get so burned out. I've seen many people working many hours into the night in Catholic Charities, and just it's so important to think about how are we kind of advocating for appropriate ways to recognize and care for our staff. Do we have a staff day? Maybe looking at that as some kind of like lost time or lost productivity, but actually if you're just working all the time, all day, all the time, then really it's important to recognize that a little bit of a break to show that you are valued as a staff then can go a long way. It's not time wasted to spend time being able to recognize the goodness that people are doing. Self-care is vital, not luxury. So this staff care is a significant part of that. Okay, so then to kind of say that we've got a couple of another slide here about that you could use as a group discussion. Do any of these principles connect with you? Do any of these principles expand your notion of what ethical practice is? You know, you could use discussion questions like that if you were to do a training at your organization. Now, I've been talking solid now for 40 minutes, so we're kind of at this point where we hope that you might have a question that any of us here, Brian or Scott or myself, could be able to respond to about implementation of the code, about content from the code, about resources that we might be able to offer from the code. So we're just going to then open it up. And so there's not really a million people on this call, so we could just kind of open it up. If anybody has a question, please just speak up.
The mics are being unmuted. So as Father Reagan already stated, feel free to just voice your question or comment at this time.
Introduce yourself, please. I have a question or a comment they'd like to make.
Yeah, this is Chris Haycraft from Catholic Charities North Dakota, and I have been in our new staff orientation kind of going over the CCUSA Code of Ethics, and then I have a stack of like physical paper copies of them that I've gotten in the past. Do you know if this new version will have actual paper booklets of the Code of Ethics?
This is Brian. Good question. So basically now the new much shorter. It's only 9 pages long, and it's on the website, and you can easily print it on a PDF on the website, easily printable. It's much shorter than that one before, so feel free to make your own. If you really want us to mail you some, let us know, and we probably make some for you. But we're basically trying to empower agencies to literally download it and just make copies as well.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else like to have a question, make a comment, observation, how you've used it, what you're struggling with? We'd love to hear from you. Please introduce yourself.
Because you came over and you're like, hello. Please sit down. Please sit down.
And sorry, if you don't have a question, just mute your line so we don't accidentally think you're trying to speak to us.
Why don't you sit it? You log in now. Why'd you log out?
No, it's log in. I was just a timber from hospital.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone. And if you do have a question, there is a hand raise tool that you can utilize.
Yeah, just raise your hand.
Or there's a question mark button. Oh, that's from before. There's a question mark button that you can use should you have a question as well, where you can just put your question in chat. We have one hand raised, it looks like, from Mark. If you want to go ahead, now your line is unmuted.
He's self-muted.
But okay, you're self-muted at this time. So if you still have a question, you would just need to unmute your phone. Mark.
Okay, here we go. This is Mark with Catholic Charities in St. Louis. I was curious to know how much adaptation you had to do to get from what you started with, which was the Charities code, to this one.
This is Brian. The Caritas code is basically 89% of what this new code is basically the original Charities Internationalis code for all the institutions around the world. The only adaptation we really did was twofold. One, we recrafted the introduction to make it more in concert with the U.S. and the history of the U.S. Catholic Charities USA code and just some language. And the second major adaptation was the insertion under protection of the USCCB charter for child and youth protection. So those are the only two major. So the introduction we adapted a little bit to make it more U.S. style with some of the things that were not relevant to the other parts of the international community, and then the charter.
Okay.
Mark, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. Actually, could I want to ask a follow-up on that too? Not necessarily on that, but just a different question I had, which at least in the discussion, I didn't see anything that referred to how we follow up with potential observations where we're not following the code. Would that be addressed in some other document on how we enforce it, shall we say?
This is Brian again. I'll speak for myself, and maybe Father Reagan or Scott might have a thought. I mean, I think that's partly as your agency adopts or adapts it. It's probably a good codicil, or probably another way that you might want to talk about that is, I mean, it's a compliance issue, but it's also one of decision making and local conversation. I don't know, Father Reagan, if you have any other insights.
You know, I feel like that this is a great thing to have as a part of a human resource policy, but it's hard to say, like, to enforce empowerment. Like, you know, you weren't empowering enough. I don't know how you would enforce that. But I feel like then that's where it would have to become up to the agency as to how you would put sort of maybe more behavioral responses to that, if that makes sense. So if we have empowerment as an important principle, how would that look? You know, and how would we know if you weren't doing it? So that might be on kind of an on the ground kind of a discussion within your local agency. But we also have some resources here at our office that are more behavioral sort of responses to things around self-determination and around some of those elements that maybe like your COA organization might require. So that might be a resource that you could access through Scott, Brian, or myself.
Right. We have a template if people want them, but they have to ask us for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Great question. Please raise your hand or type a question if you have one, and we can read it, or then unmute you. You know, let's have a question, observation, a thought, anything, please.
You know, I think that Mark did raise a good question about how is this enforceable, and I think it is important to think about like how the cool thing about this is that it's a pretty high level document, and that it's got really some thought provoking things to reflect on, and that we could be able to take I use the example of empowerment. That might look really clear to me, right, sitting here in this room, but it might look very different to someone else in St. Louis or someone else in North Dakota or whatever. So that's kind of the cool thing about it. And then also just to kind of repeat, maybe some of the things that we have that you guys could access, like Brian was speaking of, the template thing that you may be able to reach out to us to get a little bit further details on that. So I wonder if, like, does Scott or Brian, do you guys have any other further comments about any of this?
So going back just to get a little bit more history one more time. So the 2000 document had a lot more behavioral elements to it, a lot more very specific standards. And with a lot of conversation with us and directors, they wanted us to kind of look at it in a different way and provide more principles and values. And when the Caritas document came simultaneously or close by, so that's why we thought it was a perfect way to join the Universal Church. Even we always were, but that was just one more very significant way. But again, as Father Reagan said, and I mentioned earlier, we do have a more lengthy document, which is more behavioral and standardized and more COA, shall I say, looking and purposely that way. So if an agency wants to be a little bit more detailed on some of these, they can certainly take it and adapt it as they want. So certainly Father Reagan, myself, or Scott, or Gene Beal, all four of us can get you that document, or at least walk you through it if you have questions. So please know that we're a resource for you. Another thing is some dioceses have begun to call wanting someone from national staff to go out and do a training and do a conversation on that, we're willing to do that. Our biggest expense is helping, if you could help us fly there and house us, that would be the cost to the agency. The rest would be we could do it for you. So that's another way. Sometimes the outsider can always bring different views and lead that. And I know we've all done trainings on that, and all 4 of us are able and willing. And I'm sure there are others as well, as people raise their hand to want to do that as well. So please know that we're available to help. Anyone else have a question or a comment that they would like to raise? Well, seeing none at this time, I thank you all for being here with us today on this Friday afternoon and morning, depending where you are at. And thanks Father Reagan and Scott for their work in this detail. And thanks Simona for managing the webinar for us. And thank you all for being with us, and have a wonderful day today. Thank you.
Thank you all.